Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. I have the privilege of chatting today with Braden Scharfenberg, a Canadian certified counselor here in the city of Calgary. Braden, how are you today?
I'm doing great. It's good to be with you. Good to talk. How are you?
Doing well. For those that don't know me, my name is Matthew. I'm coming in from the atrium here at Masters Counseling. When you come to Masters, or one of the benefits of coming to Masters is grab a coffee, come half an hour early, and come and enjoy the peace of the atrium. Braden, thank you for joining me today. Today, we're going to talk about men's mental health. I just wanted to start off really quickly with the first question, which is from your experience as a therapist, but also as a guy, how do men approach mental health differently than women?
Oh, yeah. I think a lot of men, first of all, don't approach mental health. I think it's like, well, let's just, you don't say, don't worry kind of a thing. It's not a problem till it's a problem. I think that's a lot of the approach. If we looked at generationally, we could see that view expanding over time. But still, I think a lot of men are kind of like, I'll wait until I have an emergency before I'll bring anything up because it's just normal stuff is kind of how a lot of us look at it. And yet the missed opportunity is like the vibrancy in relationships, the enjoyment and joy and fulfillment in both family and work and different areas. And so the opportunity, I think, is to kind of see what could be, I guess, is how I would say that. But also there are a lot of people, a lot of guys, and this is true in all generations, but it's especially true in younger people that are just really open to that experience. They've seen, how generations prior to them, maybe their parents or their grandparents did the whole mental health thing or didn't do. And people are more open and they're more ready to talk about it. And you can see that in the way our culture kind of keeps it at the forefront. It's a conversation that's ongoing. But I think that men are still at a point where a lot of us tend to, kind of leave mental health as something we don't really worry about until we have to worry about it.
It's a really interesting perspective. I think maybe a follow-up question, for guys that are maybe watching this video is we should even start even further is, well, how do we define what mental health is? I mean, that's a phrase that's thrown around a lot, but what is mental health?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, actually, because when we hear mental health, we actually think of mental unhealth. We
Right.
think of these terms we've created that define when somebody is unwell. Things like depression and anxiety and bipolar disorder spectrum and just different diagnoses that people receive. What we
Right.
don't think about is that mental health is just like our physical health. It has, maybe a scale of how healthy or unhealthy we are in all these different areas.
Right.
And mental health is very much like that. It's seen inside of your, the way that you think, the things that are drawing your attention in your mind, your use or lack of use of emotions. There's just so many parts to what that is all built on.
Right.
So when I think of mental health, I think of my next question is, well, how are you doing? What is life like for you right now? What's your view of life?
Right.
Because you can be in any situation and have an extremely great experience or deeply felt joy or hope or, there's these pieces of life that are so beautiful, love. And I think of health, like the good stuff. And there's a lack of that, then we're into an area of unhealth and a need. And that's okay, but we don't want to stay there because it's just, it's not the quality of life that we are, we want and we are hoping for.
That's really interesting. I agree with you. I think when people hear of mental health, I think the natural response is, oh, someone's not doing okay. But you're right, it's
Yeah.
a spectrum. It's just like physical health. You do a bunch of work and positive work and you become healthier, whether that's you eat better or you're exercising. But then maybe there's a season of life where you're just not eating as well, or you're not sleeping, you're not taking care of yourself, and you physically notice it. I think it's the same a lot with mental health. And my follow-up question to that is, do you find that men are having similar? So let's convert the question to, instead of mental health, let's talk about mental health struggles, areas
Yeah, sure.
that probably people you're chatting with. Are you finding that men are having similar mental health struggles than women, or are they having different mental health struggles, or are they more extreme or less extreme or equal? I'm curious, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because actually the issues that are coming up are often very similar. It's actually not exceptionally different all the time. It looks different. It can manifest different. Like the way that a guy carries anxiety, first of all, can be different than another guy carries anxiety,
Right.
which can be different than a woman and another woman carrying anxiety. So there's gender wise, there are things that, look different at times or look similar in other ways. But I think for guys, there is a propensity towards hiding the experience that's going on or trying, I would actually say not hiding. It's, I'll figure it out. I don't need to bother anybody else with this.
Mhm.
It's something for me to figure out. And I think guys are exceptionally good at saying, I'll just keep this to myself until I've got it sorted because I can figure it out. And it's an unfortunate experience. And I know that that's true of women as well. So I don't want to like make that big divide by any standard. But I find with a lot of guys, when we sit down together, especially a lot of them, it's a first time experience. And there can be a lifetime of history of addiction or of some experience that's been so hard, but they just had no desire or no even maybe invitation to seek out a resource that could push them through this. Because really the message has been, well, just figure it out. We're all doing it. Why don't you do it? And the reality is that message is inherently just incorrect. Like we're all only doing as good as we are because we have other people in our lives and we have an openness of what's going on in here to out here. And without that, we don't thrive and we can't be well. Nothing thrives in the dark. I mean, you think about plants, for example. My house, you can see this is my house. I have lots of plants. I love plants. And a plant can grow a little bit in the dark. It's meant to do that because it starts underground and comes out. But at some point, it will just die because we need light. And so it's the same in our emotional world, our mental health world. If things stay in the dark, things stay hidden, unsaid, unknown, unnamed, they just are an experience within. That experience will bring us down so much over time. And then we get into the conversation of like, well, why is there so much side or addiction inside of the men's category? Just in men, it's high. You can look for it everywhere and it is, but in men, it's specifically very high. And so looking at that, well, why is that? There's a lot of things that aren't being brought in. And so I would think that that's a missing piece for a lot of guys is the safe place to, I'm going a little long-winded on this, but a lot of them also wouldn't feel necessarily comfortable bringing this up with their wives, those that are married, because it to them communicates weakness,
right?
Which is inherently incorrect as well, because weakness is not categorized in somebody who's reaching for strength. So like when we're reaching for strength, which is to be seen and known and loved, when we're reaching to be well and healthy, that is showing somebody who's quite strong. But socially, culturally, it can come across as there's something wrong or you're weak, you're broken. And so especially as men, you want to become, you want to be the stable person, the rock, this pillar in your family that everyone can just rely on and you're unchanging.
Right.
You're too high or too low. You're always just stable and right there. And that's great when that is there. And also, I don't think that's always true to the experience of life because some things are big and some things are very deep or, you know what I mean? Changes the experience. So yeah. So anyways, creating a space for guys in therapy is so important because there's not a lot of pieces culturally where that fits. And so, yeah, I'm always encouraging my clients to find a space where even outside of our office, where they can develop this in their own lives, because therapy is meant to walk with you through things and into different ways of living, all these changes. But ultimately, outside of that room, you need that openness. You need that connection with other people, and vulnerability is terrifying. So I'm with you all. It is hard, but it is completely worth it, and really what therapy is pushing you towards ultimately. In a lot of ways. Yeah.
There's so much good stuff there. One of the very last things that you said, which I wrote down for a question later on, but I'll ask it now. I've heard it said that one of the primary differences between, and just for context for those that are watching, I'm not a therapist. I'm just a dude that's, done lots of therapy.
And a lot more to go, Matthew.
And a lot more to go. I've heard it said that one of the primary differences between men and women is that women give respect to other women to be vulnerable right away. Whereas it's been said, and just an observation, I forget who said this, but men almost have to earn the right to be vulnerable. You have to have achieved something. It's the Joe Rogans or the whoever who they've achieved something that allows them to now to be vulnerable. If you haven't achieved anything, you don't have that right to vulnerability. What's your thoughts on that?
That's sad. That is so sad. And I think immediately though that there's a lot of truth in that culturally. So I'm speaking from, a white guy who lives in Calgary, Alberta, in Canada, and I've never really lived anywhere beyond this. So from my cultural perspective, I think women are just so much better in some ways at establishing those types of vulnerabilities and conversations as a norm. You can see it all the time. You walk into a coffee shop and all the women who are together will be like a table of 4 ladies and they're all leaned in and you can just hear them just sharing something and talking about something. There's this, well, like, it's the biggest deal in the world. And you can just kind of tell this is culture. This is what women do. And the reality is that, yes, it looks different in genders. It does at times, and it can look similar. Again, I don't want to say it any other way, but you can see there's this acceptance socially and culturally for women to behave a certain way. And men, you'll walk into a group of guys, everybody will be leaned back from the table. They're making the jokes, and that's great. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But you can even just see in the way that, there's this and then there's this. There's two different things going on there. And the value of friendship to me is one of the highest values I hold in my life, because to me, community and having other people in my life, having other people who actually know me and can recognize when I'm, not acting like myself, or I'm not, showcasing the qualities of character that I want. They notice that. And it's a need in every human being to see and be seen in a group of girls. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as I'm showing up as me, and there are elements of vulnerability inside of that eventually to the degree that I'm comfortable with going forward. The problem is that a lot of guys don't know how to venture into that territory. And so you kind of miss out on a lot that way. So anyways, that's a long answer to this, culturally speaking, but I think that it just does look different. There's room for vulnerability in any group, no matter the appearance of that group. There's always going to be room if there is safety. Because what is vulnerability but the expression that comes through connection and safety? And so once we have that safe connection, we can have vulnerability. And when we have vulnerability, we're now seen. And that is the greatest contributor to mental health. In fact, almost sometimes that's all that people really need, is to be seen and understood. So whatever that looks like, if that looks like a curling team and they're going out after a game, or whatever the thing is, it's good. And so I'm a big fan of that.
Another noticeable observation culturally that we're seeing, the statistics are pretty obvious, is that there is a much higher addiction and suicide within men. How does mental health play a role in this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this is the space where in mental health with a lot of guys, even guys who aren't comfortable jumping into a therapy session, when we start to get into that push towards addiction that we can't get over, maybe it's a drug related thing, maybe it's something else, or we get towards that suicide ideation, that's when everyone says, you should really you should see a counselor, you should talk to a therapist. Everybody immediately is okay with that. But there were so many steps before that we missed, or that we could have stepped into. And so that's the unique space. And I think for a lot of guys, they have been modeled from, their caregivers, that we just figure things out on our own and we deal with our own pain. And when it comes to addiction, there is a lot of, the neurobiology of addiction is really interesting. And there's a lot of facts in there as well. Truly, to me, when I think about addiction, my first question is, what's the pain? What's the hurt? What is it that's causing this medication? Because really, to me, an addiction is the expression of a pain that has been not dealt with, not healed, maybe not brought to the light in any way. And so now we found something that helps me not feel that pain anymore. And that's the current working system in that person is the addiction. So if you were to just strip that person of the addiction, that's going to be a really, really painful place for them. And so what you want to do, there's lots of approaches to addiction. That's not the part that I'm getting into, but what you want to do is say, hey, something is hurting here. Let's figure out what that is, because you don't need to be in this level of pain, and you shouldn't be. So how can we bring that down so then you don't need that addiction anymore? Because like that, imagine the addiction is, similar to an Advil for these feelings. It's shutting them down just enough for them to get by.
Right.
And eventually there's also the pieces of the addiction too that come into play. The part where that thing is also now on its own, it's all you want. There's so much, but the point being is what's hurting that got you there, and how can we alleviate that? And you look at the suicide rates in men, And it's the very same thing I'm talking about. It's that lack of like what's hurting or what's going on here and space where it is. And how can we actually approach these things together in a safe way and in a way where that other person is ready to unload that and not carry it by themselves anymore. And there's other pieces to this too, because there are mental health diagnoses for a reason. There are other things that people are carrying and can be underlying in some of these things. So I don't want to throw like a one size fits all, but for men specifically, it is usually we've waited quite a while before we've put ourselves in a space where we're seeking additional resources. And that's how I think about counseling. A lot of people think of counseling as help. It's like, and that as help starts to put us into that space of being weak again. It's like, oh, that for men, I mean, specifically, or a lot of people though, well, I need help, AKA I'm not strong enough. That's not the ideal here because you have to be very strong to work through the things that we work through in therapy. Really, the thing is here, we're talking about resources. So therapists are resources. These are things that are available, people that are available, trained people who are there for you. And I think when people are able to access those, whether it's a financial barrier or just even a mental barrier of not wanting to or cultural barrier, whatever the barrier is, once we're able to push those things aside and find resources that are going to help us, those statistics have the opportunity to be edited to be lower. And so that's something I love, obviously, in what I get to do is seeing people who step off of that course, who step out and say, hey, actually, you know what? I think I'm going to see what I could do to be different in this area because I don't like where this is going. That's a special person and it's a strong person. And I always look forward to that person.
Yeah, it really requires a proactive mindset where you're not going to react. I've heard it say, like, as you call it, suicidal ideation, which is, someone's just like, I am hopeless. I just don't see any point in life. I mean, they talk about hitting rock bottom.
Yeah.
But there were so many opportunities where beforehand, if we were being proactive in our thoughts, we could say, actually, I think that's where I'm going. And I don't really like the route that I'm on.
Yeah.
And there's opportunities. This is such a cheesy, overly masculine analogy. But I think about lift training.
Yeah.
So you and I, we both have oil field backgrounds. Teach you when you're lifting is don't lift with your legs, not with your back.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know so many people, probably including myself, where it was only after I blew out my back did I finally actually change. And then, I went and I found a person, I found a coach that actually was able to help me lift a box properly. And I was able to lift it. I'm doing less damage. And so one of the things I love about working with therapists and chatting with you is that it's like, I'm not going to fix you. What I'm actually going to do is give you advice. But, metaphorically speaking, blow out your back again.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
If I could segue into a bit of a different question, we've talked about this a little bit. And I'm going to use a bit of a hot word these days is the word masculinity. There's lots of thoughts around masculinity. I mean, culturally speaking, when we say the word masculine, we typically correlate it with men, whereas feminine would be with women. How do you think societal expectations around masculinity influences men's willingness to seek mental health support?
Yeah, I mean, in that we've touched in different ways. The funny thing is if we look at culture from a historical perspective, it's changed over and over and over. So the definition of masculinity versus femininity changes very quickly, sometimes in a few years. And then other times it changes like in a slow scale in maybe 100. Like, for example, I read an article the other day talking about preferred gender colors for kids and how, 100 and about 120 years ago, pink was like a strong boy's color and blue was a soft feminine color. So you think about these norms that we have as so important, and they're important in a way socially and culturally, but if they are not serving you and they're not helping you, are they really that important is a question I'd have. But I'd say that in the modern experience of masculinity, of the modern experience of being a man, is that there are expectations of the way that you are. There's versions. I think we have like, a caricature group of versions. You can be the strong, quiet one, the loud, funny one. You can be, there's these, we can pick our favorite, choose your player. But at the same time, I think we then miss out on these other parts of us who, like maybe somebody like myself, I really like music, for example. And so while like I have a cousin who's a bodybuilder, and I remember that when we both became teenagers, I went towards music and he went towards bodybuilding. And by the time we were 22, we used to look like twins and we looked like we couldn't possibly have any blood relation. And so, you know what I mean? Like but there's just these different expressions of that. Like
Right.
we fall in how we will. But when it comes to mental health, these expressions can either be limiting or they can be helpful. And what we want to find, because in that example actually that I just gave, someone going to the gym, for example, that's very good for your mental health. That's offering you some amazing reprieve. It's giving you those good chemicals rushing through
Right.
your brain, body. It's excellent. That's great. Same with like myself going to music. There's like a lot of expression in that, a lot of creativity. And that's also really good. It's giving me different chemicals and stuff through my brain, like the dopamine and all that stuff. So anyways, there's these great options. But, when we come to that, the version of like, I just don't talk about things. I just don't tell people stuff. I prefer to keep that to myself. That's only going to take you so far. And that's the place where I start to say, I don't think that that's serving you. It might be a cool ideal, that John Wayne image of the cold cowboy who rolls into town and he's got it all. He doesn't need
And
anybody.
saves the day.
Totally. Yeah. Like, no, you're not John Wayne, man. No one's John Wayne. It's not, that's not a real person. That person doesn't do well. But really, we just need people. We need each other. And men are no exception to that in any way, shape, or form. We just have some, maybe aversions to that. But it's extremely important.
This is a very timely analogy, and probably maybe not the best recommendation to watch in terms of a TV show, but there's a TV show that's just coming out. It's the season 3 of Jack Reacher, who's this, nomadic. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't need any physical possessions. He takes care of the weak, and, this hyper ideal of what it means to be a man, like a real manly man. There's one scene, I think it's in the first season, where his brother and him are going to visit his mother who's dying. And his brother, before they walk in, his brother looks at him and says, "Remember, I told you, don't cry. Don't let her see you cry." And then, and I remember seeing that. I was like, oh man, like I struggle with that because, if there's a moment for a young man to have emotion, seeing his mother on her deathbed. And I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong or not, but it was just sad because he's effectively having to suppress his emotions. And there's this moment afterwards where he comes out of the experience and his brother looks at him and says, "Okay, now you can cry." And it was kind of a bit of an interesting moment because his brother recognizes that he's having those emotions, whether or not it's right that he's trying to hide it from his mom or not. He's being strong for his mom. But there's this moment where the two brothers recognize that they are experiencing emotion and it's okay to have that emotion.
I think that is like a good picture of a lot of people's experience with emotions. Is like, oh, I'm actually okay with being happy. And I'm pretty okay with being angry, honestly, but I'm not really good with being sad. Sad's just an absolute no. Surprised, prefer not surprised. Like what I mean? So we kind of like, we're going down the grocery aisle and we're like, yeah, nah, put that one back. And sorry, but you actually own the grocery store. That's yours too. So anything you can find in there, you're keeping. So it's a good example of that. Like, well, don't cry. Well, it's like, I mean, okay, well then what are you going to do? I have some thoughts on that, but the person who can cry, like, are you the one who punches the hole in the wall then? You know what I mean? Like that energy is there. That real experience is there. It's got to go somewhere. And maybe it doesn't look like tears, but it can look like an experience that you're actually feeling. And that's okay.
You hit on a great comment there. I think a lot of guys, they would say, like, there's again this other cultural narrative that men don't have emotions except for anger and frustration. But those are the two socially acceptable emotions. Yeah. And the reality is that men experience all the same emotions as women do. One of the questions I had for you is, what are some of the effective strategies that you use or you used with yourself to help develop emotional vocabulary and help men express their feelings more authentically?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, because there's a saying in therapy forever, which is if you can name it, you can tame it. And if you name the emotion that's going on, now we understand what's going on and we're part of the story now. It's not just happening. I think a lot of people, before we develop that vocabulary, before we understand what experience is taking place and learn how to notice it, before that, it just seems like emotions just happen. Everything just happens and you're not in the driver's seat. You're, the back of the bus bouncing around. But the true experience of emotions is an emotion and a thought are taking place all the time. And we're not a part of the conversation most of the time. So a way that I personally use in developing that is, first of all, I'll use like a feelings wheel or something like that. Just a way to have these, like, if I'm angry, maybe I'm actually frustrated. Maybe it's actually rage. Maybe I'm, whatever. If I'm sad, what does that look like? And so there's these other options. That's helpful. Help some language. The next thing I like to do is slow an experience down.
Interesting.
What actually took place? Like, yes, you're mad. We both got that. Let's see, like, how did you
The
get
hole in
mad?
the wall would say so as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the pat's all over the place is letting you know that. But no, like, so you're angry. Yes, that's true. What were the things that happened internally? And they'll be so minute, so small. Well, I felt dismissed and this takes a long time to get to, but I felt dismissed by the way that person responded. And then I feel like no one's going to listen to me. My next thought was, then what's the point in even trying to talk about it? And you know what? And then here we are at anger, because we'll never be heard. No one listens to me. So the real issue isn't I'm mad about, the whatever thing. The real issue is no one hears me. And I really don't believe that anybody wants to hear me. And that is very hard. In fact, that's actually really painful, because I deeply desire to be heard, to be seen, and to be understood as any other person does. And so what's actually going on is a deeply sad experience of more of a grief, I would say. It's a grief of like, I wasn't heard, and I don't know that I will be heard. And over time, that's gonna, because the grief of that is actually quite hard to grab onto and actually process it out. It's not something we naturally want. When we have pain, our next reaction is to avoid it most of the time. The natural reaction is to get away. You put your hand on the stove, you burn your fingers, you're not doing that again. And so when it comes to pain, we kind of do the same thing. So the experience of being angry can go down so many different routes of, what it actually started as. And truly, I would often guess there is a grief, a sadness there that's not being allowed to process out. Because it's just that, it's grief. Just like when you lose someone who's important to you, you have to let that grief out. You have to process those emotions, both the beautiful thing that's lost and what was, and all of that. And the impacts it could have been. Grief is the same in that. The impact of not being seen in that context that I created there.
But Braden, it's painful. I don't want to have to think about those negative experiences. Obviously, I'm being cynical,
Totally.
but
Yeah.
what would you say to people who are like, I just want to avoid it?
Yeah. Well, my first thought would be to say good luck. My second real answer, that was a little bit facetious, but honestly. But my honest thought is, well, how's that been going for you? I've avoided it probably my whole life at this point in this conversation, or I've avoided it for a lot of it. How's that going for you? How's that serving you now? Is it serving you? If it is serving you, then I don't need you to change it. But if it's not, then the likely thing is that we need to consider trying something different, because that's not working. And we're all, like, some of us are expert level, and I think we're all expert level in one way or another of avoiding pain. And the people who are the strongest, if we want to talk about strength versus weakness, and especially in the men conversation, because men really look at that scale, I think, internally a lot. But a healthy person, a strong person, is somebody who acknowledges that hurt. That was painful. I didn't like that. And I would prefer to be treated a different way. That's very helpful. That's a very healthy person, because that person can have change. It's a gift to be that person.
And I'm going to segue right from there and to probably one of the most difficult areas for guys, which is how maybe cultural norms impact men connecting in relationships. You just talked about how that hurt. I've again, not a counselor, not a therapist, but I've been with guys, and I'll be sitting with them and I'll be asking them, like, why are you struggling in this relationship? And they'll be like, these are big guys, like they're, oil-filled guys. They're 250, they're 6'5", like they're big guys. Like, yeah, that little 120-pound female or wife or partner or whatever, they hurt me. They hurt me with their words. And I think we struggle to communicate that as guys. We struggle to say, yeah, that hurt. And I guess the follow-up question is why do us guys, why do we struggle to open up in relationships?
Well, for a lot of people, it's maybe never been modeled. I would like to give a lot of people the benefit of the doubt, and likely, have they ever seen that done? Have they ever seen an example of somebody who does model deep connection, conflict resolution, emotional management? Like, how have they ever seen that? Because it's one thing to get better at something that you understand. It's another thing to figure out what's missing. Because a lot of people, when something like that is missing, they don't know it's missing because they've never had it. And then we're not sure where to even start. And that's a really good place to go from, but it needs to be figured out, you know? So I would say first, like, yeah, let's check and see if we've ever seen that before. Do we have a working kind of map? Everybody has the same desire though. And that's the unique part I think about being a human, is that we all have this desire to be seen and known and loved. We have this desire for a safe and authentic connection. So everyone has that. The way we get to that can look different for everybody, but the desire, the dream, the hope for that is all built in. And then, so from there, you know, we can work with what's missing and figure that out. That's fine. And I'd also, so if they haven't had an example, that's one thing. Another thing is likely when we've been hurt, maybe it's not the issue at hand. You know, you see, well, so we've both worked in oil and gas. And, you know, you go out after work and you can see that there are different people who seem to be medicating, say, with a few extra drinks, not just like a 1 drink, but like a 4 drink or a 7 drink or something. You can see that. And so we see there's already pain. And so when you see that one person who is now quite hurt by something his wife did or didn't do, said or didn't say, all of that, there was already some pain there probably. And it's probably not just that one thing. It's helpful to name that one thing, because if we can get good at that, skills are happening. We're getting somewhere. But, oh, sorry, my dog is making its appearance. Sorry, I got lost there. My whole screen just disappeared. So I did not hear anything you said.
It's okay. It was good. We had the dog. We had other audio. It's what it like. Life just doesn't want us to get through and process some of the things we're dealing with.
Yeah. So what do you do with it then? What do you do with the interruptions? Honestly, like, what do you do with the interruptions of life? You know, because the reality is when things happen, it's not when we want them to, for the most part.
Almost always when you don't want them.
Totally. Like, people don't die when we're ready. They just die. We don't lose things when it's time. Often we just lose things. Yeah. All these hurts, we go through, and there's no way to navigate how it should have been, because the shoulds are not helpful. I heard somebody say once, like, don't should on yourself. And so when I hear myself say should, I just immediately throw it in the garbage, because where is that coming from and how is it helpful? Has it ever been helpful when somebody said, Matthew, you know, you should really just start talking to your wife differently? Like, don't shit on me, man. Okay? Don't shit on me. But it's not helpful. Point being, fair enough. Interruptions happen. We roll with them.
Oh, and maybe just to end off this conversation, I couldn't agree more with the word should. I don't think it's a coincidence that the first two letters of the word should and the first 2 words of shame are the same. I think it's because you could say, I could do this, which comes out of a place of like, I could do this. I can. There's an optimism, versus I should is like, oh, I am worthless. I have shame, and only if I was better, I could actually do that, but I'm not. So I have to try and force myself to do this. I should do it.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of pressure we put on ourselves as guys. Last question. What's the right time? What's the right point when someone's struggling mental health to connect with a therapist like yourself, Braden?
Oh, I think as soon as you think that, oh, should I talk to somebody about this? That's your time. And I know that it's not easy to find a therapist sometimes. Maybe there are financial barriers. Maybe there are stigmas, you know, you name it. But when you're at that point of, man, I've been stuck in this for a while. Like, let's get out of there. Honestly, let's get out of there, because that is not a fun experience. You only get one life. You get 80 years. Some of you get less, some of you get more, but we get this one life, and we spend so much of it stuck sometimes in these things because we think we need to figure them out on our own. The reality is we are a community-based organism. Our brains are even social. Like, we really do need to be around other people. So the benefit of a therapist is somebody else joining you, especially a non-judgmental, a no impact kind of scenario where you can say, you know, everything you need to say in a space that's completely confidential. That's such a gift. What a place to be, where somebody can join you in that space. So I think the moment you're thinking that you should maybe do that is a great place to do that, a great time to do that. And if there are barriers, I know at Masters, like, we really work really hard to bring those barriers down for people. and really help them find the right therapist for them and a therapist within their budget wherever we can. So I really appreciate working here for that reason. The other thing is a lot of people wait until it's quite late in the game. And so you're doing so much work to just come down from the high dive. Like we've climbed up this ladder of maybe depression or anxiety or you name it, just a bad experience. And now we have to come back down to where we started from and then figure out, why did we go up there? Let's work that through. So yeah, lots of thoughts in there, but I think if you're thinking about it, that would be great. If you have a friend who you're worried about, encourage them and be the example. Like I said before, it's usually a missing example when people don't know how to find that help. So be an example of that. And lastly, you do not have to be in a place of crisis. You can be just stuck. I like the word stuck because we've all been stuck. We when you're experiencing that tire spin feeling in whatever the area is, it's nice to have somebody come alongside and help you push out. So anyways, I would say whether it's early, whether you're really in a crisis, or whether you're wondering if it would be helpful for you, I think is something to consider right then. I wouldn't push it off.
That's a great ending. I remember such a guy example. I remember there was a time I had my company truck stuck in this muggy bog and I just could for the life of me not get out. Guy came along, he put his winch on the front of his truck and he pulled me out. And man, like I could not have gotten out. We really are, as you said, communal organisms. We're meant to be in community. There's power and there's strength in community. Braden, thank you so much for your time. If you want to connect with Braden, reach out to us here at Masters Counselling in Calgary. You can connect with Braden online or in person. You can get more information at masterscounseling.com. Thanks and have a great day.